Over the years, I've been to a number of debates between Christian ministers and leaders of other faiths, mainly Muslim imams. And for all the kind of friendliness that there might be between those who are debating, there are certain things over which they just cannot agree. And the most significant one is that they just can't agree about Jesus. And it becomes clear that if Christians are right about Jesus, then Jews and Muslims and so on are way off beam concerning him. But if Christians are wrong about Jesus, then they themselves are way off beam. Now, the passage we're looking at this morning is not written for kind of debate fodder, but it does come to the rescue, as it were, over this business of the significance of Jesus. And it helps us see why we just can't accept lesser views of Jesus. Now, we can't accept those lesser views if they're being suggested by people of other faiths or people of no faith. But also, we can't accept those lesser views that we carry around inside us, in our heads and in our hearts. So what we're looking at this morning is a very, very helpful passage. And it comes at the end of this kind of short series that we've had on Sunday mornings looking at this opening section of John's Gospel, chapter 1, verses 1 to 18. I found it to be a real blessing. I mean, I think many of us are familiar with the passage, but it's certainly been opened up in a fresh way to me by Matt. Very grateful for that. And really, it's a prologue. And like any prologue at the beginning of a longer work, it's designed to kind of capture our attention and to draw us into the rest of the writing. And so John wants to kind of encourage us to read on, and to do that he ends his prologue by identifying three ways in which Jesus is superior to others. So I'm just going to read again chapter 1 verses 15 to 18. You might want to have it open before you. And as I do so, can I just ask you to look for something about the superior status of Jesus, something about the superior blessings that come through Jesus, and something about the superior knowledge of God that comes through Jesus. So let me just read chapter 1, verses 15 to 18 again. John testifies concerning him. He cries out, saying, "This was he of whom I said, 'He who comes after me has surpassed me, because he was before me.' From the fullness of his grace we have all received one blessing after another. For the law was given through Moses, grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. No one has ever seen God, but God, the one and only, who is at the Father's side, has made him known." Guys, if we could put the first slide up on the screen, that'd be great. Here's our title this morning, None Like Him. 3 points about the supremacy of Jesus. And as I say, the first thing really is this supreme status that he has in this passage compared to John the Baptist. Now, many cultures view those who are older as being superior. Now, I've seen this particularly in my son-in-law Andrew's Nigerian family, and especially when he and my daughter were married. And it was a very large gathering. The whole extended family were there. And Andrew's father, Lawrence, was, of course, in a very prominent position. But I remember speaking to some ladies and asking, well, how are you related to Lawrence? We are his nieces, they explained. But then they quickly added, we are the daughters of Lawrence's older brother. And then one of them said, the senior brother. I kind of got the point. There's a kind of a hierarchy here. The older brother is the senior brother. Now, John the Baptist was older than Jesus, not by much, maybe 6 months, but enough to make a difference. And he could have claimed that kind of greater status because of his age. But he doesn't. Also, John the Baptist begins his ministry ahead of Jesus. He becomes well known. He causes quite a stir. Many people are drawn to John. He stands out from the crowd. We may know him as the man who speaks truth to power. He has a kind of a bold, revolutionary feel about him. And again, that fame could have given him a greater status. But it doesn't. He always sees himself as preparing the way for someone who will come after me. Quote, the throngs of whom sandals I'm not worthy to untie. And now here he is, according to the writer John, pointing to Jesus and saying, this is he, of whom I said, he who comes after me has surpassed me because he was before me. Yes, the baby Jesus may have been born 6 months after John, but John realizes that this Jesus was somehow alive and real way before he was born. One translation has John the Baptist saying this, before I was born, he already was. So you've got this kind of impressive, I often think of him as being kind of an Old Testament style prophet, John the Baptist, the way that he dressed, the way that he conducted himself and so on, taking a stand against the king, calling out corruption within the authorities at that time. And here he is pointing to Jesus. Superior status. Before I was born, he already was. I'm not worthy to untie the thongs of his sandals. Now, when you've read that, when you've read what John the Baptist says about Jesus, don't you want to go and find out a bit more about this one who he sees as having such superior status? To carry on. You see, John's encouraging us. He's writing the prologue. He wants us to carry on and discover this one who's so supreme, superior status to John the Baptist. But of course there's more in this passage. We go on secondly to seek about superior blessings. Compared this case to Moses. Look at that in verses 16 and 17. From the fullness of his grace we have received one blessing after another. For the law was given through Moses, grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. Now, if you think of John the Baptist as a kind of spirit man, Moses was a kind of a word man through whom the law was given. And the reference to the law here, I suppose it could refer to the whole of the Old Testament. It could refer just to the first 5 books of the Old Testament. It could refer just to kind of those specific directions for life and worship and so on that we find throughout the Old Testament. But whatever it was a blessing. The law came from the fullness of his grace, we read here. But like John the Baptist, the law was also always looking forward to something better, something superior. And now it's here. As the passage says, the law was given through Moses. Grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. Now, what is grace? Grace is God's undeserved mercy. It brings forgiveness. It brings redemption. It brings restoration. It deals with our failures, our infirmities, our foolishness. Truth here is associated with faithfulness and reliability and understanding reality. Kind of no spin, no brand management, no PR stuff going on here. Grace and truth. 2 things, if you think about it, we seek those things in our relationships with one another. We seek grace and truth. But we seek grace and truth in a bigger way in our whole lives. And that was certainly the case with a Chinese lady called Katie I was reading about recently. And she left home and came to the UK to study. And after graduating, she worked in the city and everything seemed to be going very well. And she said this about where she was headed. I had what everybody else would call a successful career. I earned a lot more than my peers. I lived in a nice area. I was hanging out with important people. I should have been content, but really I felt empty inside. Now, a fascinating story, Katie's story, because she goes to therapy. Maybe therapy will solve her issues. No. She then does a course in philosophy. Maybe that will kind of answer her questions. No. She then digs into Buddhism, that kind of traditional religion in her long-term family. She still wasn't finding what she's looking for. And eventually, she calls a friend who she knew was a Christian. And she describes a very long conversation during which time she asked some very awkward questions. And at the end of the conversation, her friend suggested, why don't you just try going to church? And when Katie did, she had a great surprise. The music was enjoyable. The people were friendly. That wasn't the big surprise. What was the surprise was this: Jesus. His grace and truth. This is how she sums it up. He's the one every person is looking for. Even in the best human relationship, there's an element of transaction there. I'll do this for you because you do this for me. But in Jesus, I have found someone who will always love me more than I love him. Grace. Don't you want that kind of love, that grace, to deal with your foolishness, your failings, your rebel heart? Don't you desire that truth, that end of your searching? Grace and truth. Here's the one through whom they come. And of course, that's again what John unpacks in the rest of his gospel. It's full of examples of the grace of Jesus. How he deals with people in all sorts of situations. Restoring. And of course, it's full of his truth, spills out with his words of insight and understanding. So again, as we kind of come to the end of this prologue, doesn't it kind of encourage us to say, I want to go and find out more. I want to read about this grace. I want to understand this truth. But before he finishes his prologue, John has one more thing to talk about, and that is the superior revelation of Jesus compared to anything else. Now, there are a few occasions in the history of God's people, Israel, when individuals have had a vision of God, but no one really sees God. So in Exodus chapter 3, Moses asks to see God's glory, and this is what happens. The Lord said, I will cause all my goodness to pass in front of you, and I will proclaim my name, the Lord, in your presence, but you cannot see my face, for no one may see me and live. Then the Lord said, there is a place near me where you can stand on a rock. When my glory passes by, I will put you in the cleft in the rock and cover you with my hand until I pass by. Then I will remove my hand and you will see my back, but my face must not be seen. Does he really see God? Isaiah, in chapter 6 of Isaiah, we read about the prophet being commissioned by way of a vision of the Lord, quote, seated on a throne, high and exalted. But in fact, when he describes what he sees, all he describes is like the hem, the train of the robe, which fills the temple. Has he really seen God? Ezekiel chapter 1, the hand of the Lord is upon the prophet, and he sees an amazing, dazzling, powerful throne which seems to be able to travel any way it wishes. The description is unforgettable, and yet notice how he concludes. What has he seen? He says this: this was the appearance of the likeness of the glory of the Lord. You see, for all that they see and the wonder of what they see, none of them truly see God. And the other thing is this: the glimpses that they get leave them terrified. Isaiah crows out, woe is me. Ezekiel falls flat down on his face on the ground. Now compare that to what we have in verse 18 here. No one has ever seen God, but God, the one and only, who is at the Father's side, has made him known. Jesus, you see, he's not the one who kind of, well, once upon a time he got a rare glimpse of a little part, and it terrified him. No, this is the only begotten. He's in a unique relationship with the Father. And he's at the Father's side. It's that phrase that the old King James translates, he was in the bosom of the Father. Where else can we go to find such understanding and insight into the true and living God? There is none like him. So as we draw this series to a conclusion, as we finish looking at this prologue, as we just round up on these verses this morning, they're great encouragements to us. We're living in a multi-faith, we're living in a pluralistic society, we live and work alongside people with all sorts of ideas about spirituality, where they might glimpse God. They might have all sorts of ideas about Jesus. Yet here we have the truth. There's none like him. Superior in his status, superior in the blessing, superior in the knowledge and the insight he gives us. Surely the right response is to say, I want to learn more about this one. Can I suggest, therefore, that maybe you take John's Gospel as being your kind of New Year project? Why not say between Christmas and Easter? Or maybe even start on the 1st or 2nd of January, whatever, and just say between then and Easter, I'm going to read through John's Gospel. He's set me up. He's kind of given me a taster in the prologue. I want to go on now to the main course. Stick with him. Walk with him. Worship him.